Linux Mint plus the Cinnamon desktop, basically since Cinnamon first existed, has been a really popular combination, especially amongst those sort of new desktop Linux users coming over from a Windows background. And one look at the Cinnamon project, and it's really easy to see why. It's very obvious what the project was inspired by, and that's absolutely not a bad thing. Now, even though this is a fairly popular combination for new users, it doesn't mean those are the only people who are using it. There are a lot of people who either started on Mint or came to it later on and have been using Linux for a really long time. And if they're not using Mint anymore, maybe they're still using Cinnamon, but over on something like Ubuntu, Fedora, or even a rolling release. Now, Cinnamon has been going strong for a really long time and is likely going to be going strong long into the future. But much like the Budgie project, there was a very important question that needed to be answered. Where is the Wayland version? Is there going to be a Wayland version? Is something being worked on that isn't public? Like, what is happening with Wayland? Or is the project just going to be left behind in the past and you're just going to have to try to make X11 somehow keep working into the future? Nowadays, Budgie does have, like, a roadmap and a plan for what they're going to be doing, but Cinnamon for a long time had been pretty close-lip about it, at least until a couple of days ago, but we'll get to that in just a bit. Now, Cinnamon's GitHub, like basically any other X11 desktop, has had Wayland issues opened. This one, however, kinda got derailed right at the start. How does it look with Cinnamon with Wayland support? Is there something already in the works? In Ubuntu 21.04, Cinnamon is currently not usable because Wayland is the default. In Fedora 34 also, by the way. Thanks. I think this person was confusing a couple of things, because yes, on the GNOME side, Wayland was the default, but I think they assumed that because GNOME was using Wayland, there wasn't the Xorg server in the repos, which is not how that works at all. But the part that really confuses me is these thumbs ups and thumbs downs. Why is the person who is completely wrong being thumbs up, and the one who is correct, who is correcting them, is being thumbs down? And it's not just this one comment. In the further one here where they actually give the explanation, they're still right, and people still disagree with them. Ignoring that whole mess though, this person's opinion is a little bit more important. This was the lead of Ubuntu Cinnamon Remix, nowadays just going by Ubuntu Cinnamon. For now, we are still using Muffin/X11, Muffin being the Cinnamon fork of Mutter. Cinnamon hasn't ported to Wayland, and classic Ubuntu may use Wayland, but that doesn't mean it's forced through every DE. I've talked to a few people, including the FerrinOS dev, who says we will inevitably go Wayland, but Clem has mentioned PRs are welcome. Muffin is also, to put it politely, a mess. From a code's eye view, at least to me it looks like a bunch of projects cobbled together in one. In another PR, Mutter is the most actively worked on project in GNOME, and when I check their commits, they are working hard on Wayland support. I guess you could just plug Cinnamon with a different window manager, I suppose Mutter, but I don't really know. It will be a difficult transition for us to Wayland. And from then on, there was certainly a bit of extra discussion, but it didn't really go that far. The last comment was in 2021. And if you do a quick search on the Mint forums, you'll see a couple of people here and there discussing how certain parts of the desktop work on Wayland. Things like the greeter, for example, and various other applications that are a part of the desktop. But nobody really wants to cobble together bits and pieces into this Cinnamon-like experience. The reason why they're using a desktop environment, the reason why they're using Cinnamon, is so they can install the desktop, and it just works. And right now, it just works on X11, and Wayland, well, it's not gonna happen. But there is one very important person we haven't heard from yet. Really, the most important person, Clement Lefebvre, better known in the project as just Clem. Now, Clem has not been completely silent on the Wayland question. They've been mostly silent, saying a couple of little things here and there. For example, this is the monthly news post of January 2023. In this post, this is when it was mentioned that the greeter was going to have Wayland support. Now, obviously, if the greeter is going to have Wayland support, someone is going to ask the question, hey, what about the rest of Cinnamon? Now, the reason the greeter got Wayland support is it's used in things outside of Cinnamon who might actually already have Wayland support. But the question was still going to be asked, and some users got a little bit heated about the matter. The fact that Clem and the team cares 0% about even trying to modernize Linux Mint for Wayland, which clearly is the future, whether users or developers like it or not, is the line I'm drawing. I was very upset with Linux Mint 19 removing KDE Plasma and leaving those users in the cold until FerronOS switched from Cinnamon to KDE Plasma back in 2020, which finally gave those users an option. Now, while I could use Cinnamon if they just gave us proper Wayland support or even had plans for the transition, I'm not even going to recommend new users even move to Linux Mint or Cinnamon until the developers of Cinnamon start listening to, the community. Wasn't that the reason for Linux Mint in the first place? So I guess it's so long to a distro that had so much promise, but in the world we live in, I guess you adapt or you die, and Linux Mint chose to go down with the ship. Now, I feel like this might be a little bit extreme, right? I think this user might feel a little bit entitled to having people do things for free. But I can understand the concern with not having any sort of plan in place, not having any sort of proper discussion about whether this is going to be something that's worked on or not. For context, even XFCE, a project that has X in its name, even they back in 2021 had this roadmap already available. It was a little bit less filled out and it wasn't really clear when things were going to get done, but there was something. It was clear that at least it was being discussed. Now, another user asked quite a bit more kindly, one question, do you plan to migrate to Wayland? Which Clem replied to with, in Linux Mint, no, not at the moment. As developers, we try to support it just like any new technology when possible. The tools we develop are also used in other distributions, some of which use Wayland. So other distros might use our tooling if they have Wayland. We kind of want it to fit in Wayland so they don't need to just randomly download the Xorg server. And at the time, that was that. But a few months later, in the July edition of the monthly news, a little bit of blog space was dedicated to discuss Wayland. When I say a little bit of blog space, I mean a sentence, which is a start. That is a lot more than Wayland was previously being discussed. We also want to spend time on studying the pros and cons of Wayland, and to assess the work needed in its potential adoption. This might not sound like much, but this was Clem acknowledging that Wayland was at least in the back of his mind, at least thought about just a tiny little bit. Nothing had been started yet, nothing was ready, but it's possible that it was going to happen. Now, it turns out that Clem was doing a little bit more than just thinking about the problem. This takes us to the most recent monthly news of October 2023. And in this one, we don't just have a sentence dedicated to Wayland, right? This time, we have a section. This is big. The work started on Cinnamon. As mentioned earlier this year, this was identified as one of the major challenges our project had to tackle in the mid to long term. Priority had been given to ISO tools and secure boot over new features for 21.3 already. We felt it was time to invest some resources into Wayland as well. So here it is, in all its glory, Cinnamon running on Wayland. Now, visually, it doesn't look that different. Obviously, there is a missing wallpaper, but this looks like a Cinnamon desktop, and that makes sense because a lot of the tooling for Cinnamon is made in GTK3 already, and GTK3 has a Wayland backend, so it's not like you need to reinvent all of the tooling. Most of it already worked on Wayland. And for anything else that doesn't, X-Wayland for most applications is going to work just fine. Now, there are obviously going to be certain exceptions where applications rely on specific protocols not available on specific desktops, but as a general rule, things like your file manager, your terminal, a video player, all of that stuff is just going to work perfectly fine. But don't take that to mean that Cinnamon Wayland is just done and everything is ready to go. This is just the stuff you visually see. There is a lot of extra stuff that basically hasn't been started yet, or at least hasn't been finished. Now, it's not a roadmap, but there is a Trello board, so if you want to keep an eye on what's being worked on, what's being discussed, this is the best place to go to. But you know what? All of these CSD-housekeeping-ally-automate, all of this stuff in here that's in the runs list now was still in the to-do list. So clearly a lot of stuff is being worked on, and this is improving really quickly. But it's still not done. There are problems like no backlight adjustment, no background, which is one of the things we did see, no keyboard switching, no logout/shutdown dialog, Cinnamon settings render lag, the sys-tray context menu appearing in the wrong position, no screen capture because they don't have an XDG portal yet, and all of these other things that still need to be dealt with. And these are things that are like direct problems. Then there are questions about, do we want to do this and how do we want to go about it? Things like, do we want to support screensavers? How do we want to do QT theming? How about high DPI stuff? Like, what are we going to do there? Do we want to handle fractional scaling? Are we going to integrate the protocol? Like, what are we going to do? And what about users who need to be able to type in things outside of just the standard Latin characters? They want to be able to type in hiragana or kanji or anything else out there that needs to make use of an input method editor like FCITX or IBUS. How are we going to go about supporting this and making sure it actually works? Now, whilst it's not going to be production ready for quite a while, that doesn't mean you're not going to get a chance to use it. We don't expect it to replace Xorg as default anytime soon. Not in 21.3, not in 22.x, but we want to be ready all the same. Cinnamon 6.0 planned for Mint 21.3 this year will feature experimental Wayland support. You'll be able to select between Cinnamon, the default session running on Xorg, and Cinnamon on Wayland from the login prompt. The Wayland session won't be as stable as the default one. It will lack features, and it will come with its own limitations. We won't recommend it, but you'll be able to give it a shot if you want to, and it'll be there for interested people if they want to give us feedback. As you can see on the board, many things are missing or broken, but we've got a fundamental session with Windows, applications, and workspace management. We're able to log in, run most apps, manipulate Windows, workspaces, Nemo, the panel, etc. It's a basic desktop, but it is a desktop nonetheless, and it is ready to actually play around with. Release early, release often, and get feedback as quickly as possible. Yes, there are going to be people that use it in its current state and say, Cinnamon on Wayland is never going to be ready because I ran it when it was an experimental version and it was bad. But those people will always exist, and for everybody else who wants to see the thing improve, this is a good thing. We wanted to have a clear picture of the work involved, so we wanted to start now. In terms of timing, never mention timing, never have any sort of time frame, because people are going to hold you to it. Clem didn't do that. We don't think we need Wayland support to be fully ready, i.e. to be a better Cinnamon option for most people before 2026, Mint 23.x. That leaves us 2 years to identify and fix all the issues. Now that you've said that, people are going to expect it to be in a really good state before 2026. Good luck, Clem. I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you get it done. Because when that date passes and it is not ready, expect to get some interesting comments. It's something we'll continue to work on whenever it happens. Assuming it does, we'll consider switching defaults. We'll use the best tools to do the job and provide the best experience. Today that means Xorg, tomorrow it might mean Wayland. We'll be ready and compatible with both. Now, one thing that's kind of unclear to me is what the compositor is actually going to be based on. Now, Muffin as it stands on the X11 side was based on the Mutter project. But I don't know if that's still going to be the case going into Wayland, or if they're going to build something new based on WL roots. I would imagine WL roots because that's what most projects end up doing outside of GNOME and outside of KDE. But right now, I've not been able to find any information on this. So, Clem, if you happen to see this and you maybe possibly want to talk about what's being done on the Wayland side and how you're going about doing it, hit me up and we'll have a podcast and talk about it, because that will be fun. Anyway, are you a Cinnamon user? Maybe you're an ex-Cinnamon user who moved on to something like Plasma or maybe even GNOME. I would like to know why you left it, and are you excited for there to be a Wayland version of Cinnamon, or is it something you just don't really care about and you'll use whatever your desktop supplies? I would love to know. So if you like the video, go like the video, and if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to the Pay link in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and whilst the Cinnamon desktop is pretty cool, the Cinnamon thing you use for cooking, I kind of hate it. Like this.